Hello everybody and welcome to Minnesota Landlord Forms. Today we will be covering one of two May 2025 updates in the city of St. Paul that affect landlord-tenant law. You may have heard there were two major updates. One, which we will cover today, relates to rent control, or also known as rent stabilization. The other is renter protections similar to the city of Minneapolis. Those don't apply till next year, and those will be available in a separate update provided by Minnesota Landlord Forms. Okay, so jumping right in. What in effect City of St. Paul did is it had a conversation to address the strict rent control specific to new construction. So if you do not own a building or manage a building with a certificate of occupancy, a new certificate of occupancy from 2005 on, January 2005, this exception will not apply to you, and you're free to move on to other materials that we provide. If this does apply to you, if you do own or manage or are interested in purchasing an apartment building or rental housing with a certificate of occupancy from January 1, 2005. Please continue. All right, so in front of you, you can see a few of the dates. So this new law was passed in May 14, 2025, very recently. That was signed by the mayor of St. Paul. And here you can see in yellow, as I've marked, it relates to amending Chapter 193A08 related to rent control. So lots of preamble as to why they did it. Basically, it relates to, the private market slowed down quite a bit. All right, so here is what we're just going to briefly cover today. What is the exception? All right. The limitation on rent increases shall not apply to, again, this is all the rental increases in St. Paul. If you're familiar or not familiar, landlords are allowed 3%, and if they want to go higher than 3% annually, there's all sorts of processes that relate to the why. And we're not going to cover that today, but we're just going to assume that this exception is broad and applies broadly to all rent increases, so long as this specific exception is met. Okay. We will continue on to the two specific exceptions in front of you. All right, so the limitation on rent increases shall not apply to newly constructed residential rental properties that were first issued a certificate of occupancy after December 31st, 2004, right? This goes back to the January 1, 2005 that I mentioned. And again, this is a first certificate of occupancy. So if this is a residential apartment building and has always been a residential apartment building, the exception only applies if it's after this date. So if there was a major renovation of an existing residential building, of an existing apartment building, this exception would not meet there. However, if we go to 3B, that relates to a change of occupancy classification from non-residential to residential rental property that were issued their first building certificate of occupancy after December 31, 2000, right? So what that would mean is, let's say there's a downtown St. Paul apartment building that was office or was industrial or was something else, and it was renovated for the first time with the use transferring to residential, right? Non-residential to residential. And that first residential certificate of occupancy after December 31, 2004, then this exception is met. Okay, pretty straightforward, pretty short. The key last provision here is this ordinance shall take effect and be enforced 30 days following its passage, approval, and publication. Okay, so we're just going to pop back up to the top where we started our dates again, May 14th, 2025. So if we add 30 days, we're into June 14, 2025. That's when the exception applies. We're not going to apply this new law to any of the facts, but just out at a very high level, obviously all of the rent control restrictions related to signing new leases and that whole process of rents that are subject to rent, you're going to have to be obviously aware of this 30-day pause before the exceptions occur, right? So it's May. If you're looking at signing June leases and attempting to not have the rent control apply, well, just be mindful of this 30-day pause into mid-June before the exceptions apply at all. If you have fact-specific questions, you're welcome to reach out to me separately. Minnesota Landlord Law. Again, I'm Bradley M. Sheppy. I hope this was helpful, and look for more of our material very soon at minnesotalandlordforms.com.